Bonjour. Gawina PG, Ninita Ojibwe Mosi, Jessica Glidden, Indigenous Cause, Awasi, Indodame, Boys Fort, Nindojiba, Shakpe, Nida. Hello, everybody. My name is Jessica Glidden, and I'm Ojibwe from the Boys Fort Band of Chippewa, Northern Minnesota. I belong to the Bullhead Fish Clan. I am the Leadership Development Program Manager at Native Governance Center. I'm calling in today from the beautiful homelands of Shakopee, Minnesota. On behalf of NGC, I want to thank you all for joining us today. Native Governance Center is a Native-led nonprofit that supports Native nations in strengthening their governance systems and capacity to use their sovereignty. We encourage you to learn more about our programming by visiting our website, nativegov.org, or by following us on social media at NativeGov. Today's virtual event, Indigenous Representation Matters, will explore the benefits of having Indigenous representation across all sectors and at all levels. Our panelists will also cover how all of us can get involved to advocate for increased representation. This topic resonates with me personally because I've struggled with cultural identity my entire life, often wondering, where do I belong in this world? Growing up, I saw few people that looked like me outside of my immediate family. I did not have any Native American teachers, doctors, or dentists, and I don't ever recall seeing Indigenous actors on TVs or on posters or in magazines. In my school years, I was able to meet some other Native American folks that I still consider my best friends today. This was really important to me because it helped me feel validated, and I was able to express commonalities comfortably amongst my Native peers. I believe everyone deserves to be seen, validated, and heard for who they are, and that is why Indigenous representation matters to me. I don't know about you, but I'm really excited for today. A few housekeeping items. I'd like to remind all of you to submit questions for our Q&A portion by using the Q&A box on Zoom or in the comment section on Facebook. We'll transition to Q&A at around 3:45 Central. This event is being closed captioned. You can turn on closed captioning if desired using the button on the bottom of your Zoom screen. Finally, I'd like to give a shout out to our sponsors. Thank you to Anderson Realty, a boutique real estate brokerage with 60-year tradition that's simple. Work hard and put people first. We're grateful to CLA, which exists to create opportunities for their clients, their people, and their communities through their industry-focused advisory, outsourcing, audit, and tax services. And thank you to the API Group, a market-leading business service provider for safety, specialty, and industrial services, for supporting our full event series as well. We're not quite done yet. Thank you to mHealth Fairview, a collaboration among the University of Minnesota Physicians, and Fairview Health Services that combines the best of academic and community medicine to care for our communities and advance health equity. Finally, we'd like to give a huge shout out to Sovereign Finance, a 100% Native American owned firm that has been developed to meet the unique financial service needs of tribes, tribal enterprises, and tribal organizations. We're going to start today's event with a short presentation on Indigenous representation basics. Then we'll follow it up with a panel discussion. So we're really excited to have this stellar group of panelists with us here today, representing a variety of different sectors. We're not going to try to explain the meaning of Indigenous representation in each and every sector today. Instead, we'll leave it to our panelists to share their insights and wisdom from their particular areas of work. What we will do is show you some examples that illustrate just how far we've come regarding representation. We still have a long way to go, but it's important to celebrate the wins along the way, big and small. These examples will get you thinking about what representation looks like and why it matters. We'll also provide a short introduction to Native narrative change and how it ties into representation. All right, we're going to go back in time a little bit in our first example. On your left, you'll see Alexander H.H. Stewart, an awful human who served as Secretary of Interior from 1850 to 1853, notably on the subject of Indigenous people. He said, "The only alternatives left are to civilize or to exterminate them." Unfortunately, following Stewart's tenure, the Department of Interior has continued to perpetuate genocide, systemic racism, and white supremacy. which is why Deb Haaland's appointment is so monumental. Deb Haaland became the first Indigenous Cabinet Secretary when she was confirmed as Secretary of the Interior in 2021. This is a huge step forward for Indigenous representation. Since her confirmation, Deb has expanded protections for Native lands, investigated violence inflicted by boarding schools, removed derogatory language from public lands, restored Bears Ears National Monument to its former size, and more. Next, we're going to talk TV. Everyone probably recognizes this guy on the left. It's Johnny Depp. Here he is being all pretendian as Tonto in The Lone Ranger. Hollywood, unfortunately, has a long history of stereotyping and using non-Native people to play Native characters. Contrast that with Reservation Dogs. If you haven't seen it, stop what you're doing and stream it on Hulu tonight. This show is written and directed by Native people and features a majority Native cast. You won't see any non-Natives playing Native people here. There's power in seeing people who look like us and sound like us on the big screen. And Reservation Dogs is a big win for representation. You've probably all heard of Pendleton blankets, but did you know that Pendleton is not Native owned and has a long history of profiting off of Native designs and imagery? Urban Outfitters is another example of culturally appropriated brand. The brand illegally used Navajo Nation's name for a line of products, including underwear and flasks. Rather than supporting Pendleton or Urban Outfitters, Native-owned businesses like 8th Generation and Urban Native Era are a great alternative. 8th Generation features 100% Native design products rather than Native inspired, and it's owned by the Snoqualmie tribe. And it features, the Urban Native Era is an Indigenous owned brand that works to raise visibility through fashion and design. All right, so here we are. Who's hungry? Hopefully everyone can fuel up with a tasty snack before heading into the polls this evening. On your left, you'll see an example of what most folks consider Native cuisine. Unfortunately, this fry bread stand is not even owned by Native people. On your right, you'll notice the logo for Owamni. Owamni is an Indigenous-owned James Beard award-winning restaurant located in Minneapolis that provides a decolonized dining experience. Owamni prioritizes ingredients from Indigenous producers and has removed ingredients like wheat, flour, and dairy. Okay, who remembers the image from their history textbook? Or perhaps you saw it in real life back in the day. Even if you've never seen this before, you should know that Iron Eyes Cody was an Italian dude chosen to play a sad Native dude in this Keep America Beautiful PSA about pollution. If you think this print ad is bad, wait, there's more. Iron Eyes Cody starred in a TV ad too. While canoeing down the river, he discovers pollution floating in the water and on the beach, and he sheds that same tear on film. Let's compare this to the work of actual Indigenous environmental activists. We're glad for folks like Nick Tilson of Indian Collective that are finally being recognized. Now that we've provided a few examples, why does all of this matter? Well, Indigenous representation is an important part of Native narrative change. The Native narrative change movement seeks to create change across sectors through accurate representation of Indigenous people. For too long, many of our major institutions have excluded Indigenous people and perpetuated harmful stereotypes. Indigenous representation is a way to reclaim space, challenge hurtful narratives, and rewrite the script. It's much harder to exclude Indigenous voices and fuel stereotypes when there are actual Native people at the table. There are many other benefits to Indigenous representation too, and we're excited to have our panelists tell you more. It is now my great honor to introduce our moderator for today's panel. Let's all welcome our host, Rachel Evangelisto. Rachel will kick off our panel discussion, and I'll leave it to her to tell you a little bit more about herself. Take it away, Rachel.
Thank you so much, Jessica. That was really informative, and I really appreciate that fantastic introduction into what I think is going to be a really phenomenal panel discussion. So hello, my name is Rachel Evangelisto. I'm a member of the Standing Rock Sioux Tribe, and I'll be your host and moderator for today. A bit about me. I grew up in Rapid City, South Dakota, where I think I didn't see a positive example of Indigenous people pretty much anywhere. And in fact, it was almost the opposite. It was really frowned upon to be Indigenous where I grew up. And I was often really scared to even tell people that I was Indigenous. And then I went to school at the University of Minnesota Morris, which offers free tuition for Native American students. And it was there that I saw some of my first examples of being a positive Indigenous role model through professors, colleagues, and other students. And now I live and work in Minneapolis, Minnesota, where I work as an ICWA guardian ad litem under the Indian Child Welfare Act. And I look up for the best interest of Native American youth involved in child protection and foster care cases. And most recently, I had the really esteemed honor and privilege of becoming the 86th and first ever Indigenous Miss Minnesota. And I will now compete at Miss America this upcoming December in exactly 1 month in Uncasville, Connecticut at the Mohegan Sun. So I've been an embodiment of Indigenous representation within Minnesota, and I'm really honored to get to host a really esteemed panel of Indigenous change makers. So if I could have them join me right now and just kind of give some brief introductions of who the panelists are, what they're doing. If you could come off video. Hello, hello, hello. So if I could just have, let's start with Mathew, go to Rosalie, go to Jaime. If you could just introduce yourself, tell us a bit about your current role, and explain why Indigenous representation matters to you. Mathew.
Okay, my name is Mathew Holding Eagle III. I work at NPR News, and I am the regional reporter out of Northwest Minnesota. And I am smack dab in the middle of 3 of the largest reservations in Minnesota, Leech Lake, Red Lake, and White Earth. So I started in January, the middle of January. So I've been here since then, and I've been able to tell a lot of stories, Indigenous stories that weren't being told. Indigenous representation matters to me to move the societal dialogue along. I have a daughter, and I remember having the discussion about culture and telling her a little bit of our family history, and telling her that she was Indigenous. And when she heard that, she said she didn't want to be. She was pretty young, like kindergarten, first grade. She said she didn't want to be, and I said, well, why? What's wrong? And she said, because they're dirty. And that really impacted me. We had a long discussion, and where I spend half my time is very, there's a lot of racial imagery still. And so it's not hard to see where she got some of these thoughts, but I've been able to help teach her and help grow that perception, and make her feel better about herself as she's gotten older. So now I believe she has a better grasp on all that. So just to leapfrog that into what I'm doing now, if anybody else's daughter or anybody else's children, don't have to struggle with that, that thought process, I'm happy to whatever I could do, that's it.
Yeah. And then on to Rosalie.
Hostel Rosalie Fish Seatsta, Buckleshoot, EFT, Cowlitz, Abshed. I'm Rosalie, I'm 21 years old, and I am a cross country and track athlete at the University of Washington. For me, one of the things that made me realize that representation is important is being a female runner and being Native. It was very isolating and lonely, especially over on the Coast Salish lands, where our things are more like canoeing and less so running. So there's not as many runners. And for me, being able to find empowerment through something where I was the only one doing it, and I was the only runner on my my team too. And seeing Jordan Marie Daniel, who is a professional marathon runner from the Lakota tribe, seeing her run in the professional setting and in the Boston Marathon gave me the strength and the empowerment to run for my community and my people, and also following in her footsteps and running for missing and murdered Indigenous women, and understanding that my role as an NCAA athlete means that I am being put on a platform and being given a voice that other natives don't have the privilege of having. So I'd like young Native girls to see me just as I saw Jordan.
Absolutely, thank you. So thank you so much for being here today, all of you. I'm really honored to get to host this panel of some really phenomenal Indigenous change makers, all within our own right. And it's really beautiful to hear parts of your story. So thank you. So I have a list of questions that I want to go through. Some will be applicable to two of our panelists or all, but I'll let you know in advance of what that will be. So to start, I'll start with a question out to all of you, and we can keep going in the order of Mathew, Rosalie, and Jaime. But this question, and if you ever need me to repeat the question, I understand. So just ask and I can. But the first question is, what's the current state of Indigenous representation in your specific field? How, if at all, has it changed over time? Mathew.
Okay. Well, I'm a little nervous, so let's just get that out of the way. I'm a member of the MHA Nation, Mandan Haditsa Arikara in Northwest North Dakota. So I wanted to say that. I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, we're all nervous, right? It's exciting. We've got a lot of people attending.
First time I've ever been a panelist for anything. So.
Well, glad to have you. So the question was, what's the current state of Indigenous representation in your specific field? How, if at all, has it changed over time?
In my specific field, it's not, I would say it's representation is not very great. For example, Minnesota Public Radio is the second largest public news outlet in the United States. When I was hired in January, and I don't think it's changed much, American Public Media Group, the company that owns NPR and two other outlets, one in California, I forget where the other one is. There were only 3 Indigenous workers, and I think I was the only reporter. So at Minnesota Public Radio, I am the only Indigenous reporter for them. And since I've been here, it hasn't changed at all. I know that there's like NAJA, the Native American Journalists Association. I know that entities like that exist, but from my perspective and the way that I've come up and gotten to where where I am now, from what I've seen, it's been pretty much non-existent. So hopefully that changes. I know that there's a lot of pipelines and figuratively, work being done with education institutions to hopefully create these avenues where other journalists can come along, Indigenous journalists. Yeah, so increase the numbers.
Okay. So you're the only Indigenous reporter within your field right now?
At Minnesota Public, at NPR News, yes, I am. At American Public Media Group, I am one of 3. So yes. Amazing. And it's a big company. It's very big. Yeah.
Very big. Thank you. And Rosalie?
So in the athletics side, there's not a ton of representation, especially on the NCAA level. You have like your occasional like super outstanding Native athletes like Jim Thorpe, Billy Mills, and then you've got Jordan Marie Daniels, and we have a ton of talent in Native people, especially athletically. Now, whether or not we're being put out there is the problem, because we've got more than enough athletes and more than enough talent. And even at the University of Washington, I am one of 3 out of the entire student body, or the athletic facility. One of 3 Native people, and we're all seniors, so we're going to be gone either this year or the next. For me, I was the first person at my tribal school to ever sign an athletic letter of intent. And it really sends a message to Native youth, especially Native youth who want to be athletes beyond high school, that we don't have any space in these settings, when there's no room for us in these spaces. I say that there is a ton of work to be done, and it's not necessarily the fact that we don't have talent. It's the fact that no one's looking for us. And that needs to change. And it's taking me and the other 2 Native athletes at UW, and we're the ones pushing. Like, we want to get a bunch of Native athletes from around Seattle and the high schools and take them through a tour of UW athletics, right? Like, we need to be doing more as athletic institutions to recruit, because the Native talent is there. Even more so, we have a rowing team at the University of Washington. And when have they gone to the tribal schools who we, like, for a living, pull on canoes? Like, that's what we do. And we are good at it, but no one is looking for us. And we're missing opportunities to show off our athletic potential and talent, because no one is taking the time to invest in us. So that's something that needs to change.
Awesome that you, one, have noticed that and can make a difference within that field. It seems very, very vital within your community. So thank you for doing that work. And then our final panelist, Jaime, maybe the audio got a little corrected.
All right, Rachel, does this sound any better?
That sounds great.
Okay, good. Glad we got that fixed. Well, I mean, I've got to say, in the Biden administration, we've seen incredible leadership representation from across Indian country. If you look at past administrations, the standard Native desk was the Assistant Secretary for Indian Affairs. But now you've got the Assistant Secretary. And look across Interior. You got Bob Anderson from Boisfort as a solicitor. You've got Chuck Sands from Umatilla as a Park Service Director. You can go over to agriculture. See Heather Don Thompson over there, and Zach Ducheneau, and Janie Hipp, who's a solicitor at agriculture. And it goes on to Treasury, Commerce, the White House staff, and now inside the Pentagon. And I'm from Nez Perce, and my boss is Mike Connor, who's from Taos Pueblo. So you see this incredible leadership transformation within the administration. And I think that with each administration, there has always been this aspiration to diversify representation in your cabinet. But to me, the real key has been this talent pool of tribal leaders and advocates and political positions who want to come forward and are willing to serve the administration in developing policy and a willingness to serve. So I think that's been the real change maker, is the pool of talent that we now have in Indian country.
Yeah, that's awesome, especially all those different levels. I mean, that's fantastic to hear, because you know how much that can trickle down into other parts of our government. So it's really exciting to see that finally starting to happen, right?
Right.
Thank you to each of you for your introductions. So the next question is going to be pointed at Rosalie and Mathew to start. So the question is, we're seeing an increase in Indigenous stories from reservation dogs, Rutherford Falls, Perce, all sorts of different media attention that's starting to happen. What impact, if any, has this increased representation had on your own life? And what stories or representation are you hoping to see more so in the future? Mathew?
It's raised awareness, and it's opened doors, I believe, to for the audience to want to learn more about our stories, and they want it adds like a level of authenticity as well. You know,
Yeah.
when you used to not being represented in the media, or having a place at the table, it's much more impactful and surprising when you hear these voices come out. I've had huge feedback from Red Lake Nation. I've dealt with them, had very good relationship with them since I started. They've been very welcoming to me, trying to make other inroads with White Earth and trying to get these stories out and amplify voices, right? Because that's what journalism is about. It's not about me. It's about the story. It's about the people. It's about being able to strengthen all that and make it more powerful. More people, like I said, raise awareness. And what was the second part of the question?
So the second part of that was, what stories or representation are you hoping to see more of within the future, if any?
I like stories that kind of show a light on, like, how do I say this? Unlike colonization, the first stories I did when I started at NPR were TEK stories, traditional ecological knowledge, and how we had ways of doing things that were outlawed, like our relationship with fire and like the forest floors, and all of this knowledge that was suppressed and sometimes just made illegal, and how now DNRs and different entities are going back and they're like, you know what, like indigenous people knew what they were talking about with fire, burning the floors and getting rid of all these potential fuels that could erupt into massive forest fires, was, they knew what they were doing, it was legitimate, like, oh my goodness, so seeing this and seeing that those types of stories evolve and continue, and they're the way our voices right now are being amplified, it's gonna add more, like more people will speak, because right now sometimes it's hard getting these stories out, like sometimes they don't want to talk, and just putting out these relationships and letting the subjects, or however you want to call them, tell their stories and tell them that their voice is important, and that there is a legitimate, like, audience. People want to hear these stories, that's what I want. I want more of that. I want to know, I want this evolution that, like, we as the first people here, when the colonists walked off and they were able to walk under the underbrush of a forest, like, oh wow, there's so much area, why is this, and not even comprehending that we had a hand in that. So more stories like that.
Oh, I want more stories like that too. Yeah. And then Rosalie.
Okay, can you repeat the first half of the question?
Absolutely. So the question is, we're seeing an increase in Indigenous stories and representation in mainstream media. What impact, if any, has this increased representation had on your own life? And what stories or representation are you hoping to see more of within the future?
I think one thing that's really special about the representation that we're seeing now is that there's been stories about us, but these stories are being told by us, for us. Like, you're going to see non-Native people watch reservation dogs, and jokes are going to go over their head. You're going to have people looking over, like, what does studis mean? And to me, that shows, like, this is for us. It's not for anybody else. And we know that it's for us because it was made by us. Oh, and I really love that. I love that we're doing things that aren't made for the public eye or for, like, the mass majority. Right? Like, Prey has this option where you can watch it all in the language. Like, that isn't made for non-Native people, right? Like, or if it is, great for them, but like, that is special to us specifically. The one thing I would like to see a little bit more of is more like movies and films about the American Indian movement. I think that is just such a powerful moment in our history, and people don't even know what AIM is. And I think it would be really cool to cover that gap. Like, there's such a gap between what we learn in the history books and what we're coming forward with now. And I want to start filling those gaps. And I think starting with the American Indian movement would be huge.
Oh, that's wonderful. And that is really important. I've met some really wonderful, I think, matriarchs that were a part of the American Indian movement as Miss Minnesota, and just their stories were incredible. And I wish more people could hear that from them, because the impact it had on me that day was little, but the impact it could have on the nation is really profound. So thank you. I appreciate that. And I want to answer this too, because I think for me, I'm the first Indigenous Miss Minnesota in our 86-year history. That's very, very long overdue. And I'm one of a handful of women that come from an Indigenous background that have ever competed within the realm of pageantry and are now competing for Miss America in December. And, as a little girl, it would have been amazing for me to see a show like reservation dogs or Rutherford Falls, like Indigenous humor in a positive way, and to having even just one example of a positive person that was really proud of their Indigenous identity would have sparked something within me to be more positive to myself and my own Indigenous identity. And I tell kids that all the time when I work with them as Miss Minnesota or within my own job as a guardian. And to have that representation, I think, is really important. And I'm really excited to be able to wear beadwork and a ribbon skirt on national television at Miss America, because nobody's ever done that before. I want to see more people stepping into those fields or on the track or within radio or within the government in their beads and wearing their traditional culture and with pride and honor, and showing kids that it's okay. It's okay to have self-doubt. It's okay to be negative on yourself, but look, we can do it. You can do it too, kind of thing. So the next question, we'll start with Jaime. So listen good. So this question is, how does increased Native representation impact the sovereignty of Native nations?
Well, first, Rachel, thanks for not letting me have to answer that last question, because I would have had to carbon date myself to be a kid growing up with mainstream media of the 50s.
Yeah,
so
it's a little different.
It was quite different. We didn't have heroes like we have today. I think an act of a sovereign nation, as a tribe is our ability to pick our partners, to call the shots. And I feel when we have representation in other sectors in the non-Native community, is that it helps us to change the world from the inside. How can we help shift the dialogue within, for example, philanthropy or the federal government, state agencies, or nonprofits, in helping them see a few things. One is, what are the real challenges that Indian country has? But more importantly, helping them understand how tribes operate, how we make our decisions, how we are organized, how we identify and how we act as Native nations. So being able to kind of, from the inside, build this momentum of the Native identity, its role in society, the kind of capacity that we have to be change makers with our communities and among our neighbors. I think these partnerships is really a true act of sovereignty.
That's awesome. Absolutely. Rosalie, same question to you, and I can repeat it, is how does increased Native representation impact the sovereignty of Native nations?
So for me anyways, especially being involved in just like tribal politics and tribal government in general, one thing that's really special about sovereignty is oftentimes outside of our tribe, we are constantly fighting for a seat at the table, right? For a say in the decisions being made. And when we are sovereign nations, it's like we are the table, right? And we get to decide which voices are being represented. And we're also deciding what matters, instead of what I see in research all the time, especially being in social welfare at UW, is all of these studies being done on alcoholism, right? Or on homelessness. And these are really big issues in the community. But researchers outside of Indigenous people are always looking at the symptoms. But when Indigenous people are doing research for ourselves, we're looking at the causes, we're looking at prevention, we're looking at boarding school trauma, generational trauma, PTSD, and violence against Indigenous peoples. And that's what happens, is we focus on prevention when we are doing things for ourselves and we're acting as sovereign nations. And it goes to show that normally we are the only ones who know what we need. And I see it a lot in social welfare, is outside people from outside of the community projecting what they think Native communities mean. And we have the right as sovereign nations to decide how we want to care for our people, listening to our people. And I think that's super special, and it puts us in a really unique place that other demographics in the US don't get to have.
Yes, absolutely. I agree. Kind of the same thing here in Minnesota too. I also work within social welfare as a ICWA guardian ad litem. And when I started this job, I mean, Native youth in Minnesota made up less than 2% of our population, but made up over 26% of all of our child protection cases. I mean, Native youth were 16 times more likely to be put into out-of-home placements that were deemed unsafe. And to me, that was atrocious. We had a huge problem in Minnesota, but now, I mean, Minnesotans, and specifically our 11 tribal nations, have really stepped forward to create a whole framework about ICWA. And as we know, ICWA is going before the Supreme Court tomorrow. And when I think about sovereignty, I mean, that is one of the biggest challenges to sovereignty that we're facing right now as Native nations as a whole. And I'm really proud of the representation that we're just starting to see within, I mean, the legal field, the federal field, within social work and child welfare. But there's still so much more to go. And the fact that we're even at a point where ICWA is being challenged, it to me is a little scary. So I'm sitting on pins and needles waiting to happen. And I know the rest of Indian country is as well. So thank you for sharing. Our next question will go to all. So we can start with Mathew. Tell us about a scenario you've faced related to being an Indigenous person in your field that's been particularly challenging.
In my field personally, before I made it to the radio and NPR, I worked in just community newspapers, print journalist, wrote for magazines, just nothing really major. And I ran into a lot of just racism. I ran into a lot of racism and appropriation. I had to cover events like in Battle Lake, Minnesota, on my old beat. There's a yearly festival called Chief Winaga Days. And it's appropriation. Chief Winaga never existed. And I know this because I became friends with the Otter Tail County the head of the museum. So he said, you know, this Chief Winaga never existed. This legend exists that there was a battle a long time ago, and he rode up and saved the day. I forget the specifics of it. But basically, they just this small town. Every year they have this festival, and they all capitalize on this imagery that does not belong to them. So a challenge for me was to, as a journalist, go into this and not bring my personal feelings into it, even though they are there and they exist. You know, another one where I just flat out refused to take part in. There's a gas station called the Little Chief Outpost, and it's horrible. It's horrible. It's like a chirp-faced Native American with rosy cheeks and a feather. And they asked me, the gas station was opening, and they asked me to go take photographs for a potential story, and I just couldn't do it. And I thought, you know, the other newsroom, I thought we were all on board. I thought, you know, we're just gonna, you know, not give this racist imagery any attention. And so I'm sitting at my desk, and my editor walks in, and the other reporter walks in, and he's eating chili. And I'm like, where'd you get that chili? He's like, oh, I got it from the Little Chief Outpost. I was like, I thought we were boycotting the Little Chief Outpost. And he's like, oh, no. He's like, the chili's pretty good. I'm like, I don't want to hear about the chili. And then they did like 99-cent gas. So there was like a line. That's what we wanted a photograph of, like a stretch of cars a mile long. So it's like, what's the price of racism in America today? It's 99-cent gas and a bowl of chili. But I kind of forgot your question.
That was a great line, though. Wow.
Right.
No, I mean, I think that answered the question. It was
okay.
Just, about a scenario you face, and that's definitely a scenario that I don't want to see repeated anymore. And then Rosalie, same question to you.
Could you repeat that one more time?
Absolutely. The question is, tell us about a scenario you faced related to being an Indigenous person in your field that's been particularly challenging.
Oh yeah, I can say a few. I think the most predominant experiences I had was being an athlete at Muckleshoot Tribal School on the Muckleshoot Reservation in Washington. For me, there were so many different, it was like a multitude of events. One was, okay, so like most res schools, like our school is really good at basketball, you know, it's the thing. And we were competing against, predominantly private Christian schools just because of the school size and the league that we're in. And we were beating this team, and there was some poor sportsmanship on both sides, you know. Yeah. We were definitely getting a little like smug. The other team was not happy to be losing. And then when I go into the bathroom, I saw graffiti in the women's stall, and it said like, drunken Indians, live off the government, savages, like all of these slurs and offensive phrases were in the stall of a gym bathroom that elementary, middle schooler, high schoolers, and elders use. And that was one of the first times that I ever really internalized, like, this is how we're perceived. And I didn't even have to go off of the reservation to see that. They came in and did that to us. And after that, it was like more and more noticeable. As a senior in high school, I would apply to get into an all-city meet because we're a border reservation with the city of Auburn in Washington, and they were doing an all-city meet, and we lie within Auburn boundaries. So I asked, I want to be in this meet too, and they asked me, well, do you even own a uniform? Right. Well, I was a senior in high school, and they said, oh, well, if you want to compete, you're going to have to go into JV. Right. Luckily, my coach was pretty snappy, so he got me into the varsity meet, and I won. And there are teams and schools that are so scared to lose to a native athlete, to a native school, and they will do anything they can. I was excluded from meets, even though I qualified for the time, because they had never heard of Muckleshoot Tribal School before. It was just all of these interactions. It was so common to face any kind of to face barriers, to just try to do what I love to do, which is be an athlete. Yeah. And it felt like I was starting 100 meters behind the start line with everybody else. So racism was, oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just saying you had to fight your way to get there to show up in the first place. Yeah.
So racism was very predominant and even became like normal for me being an athlete.
Yeah. And then last, Jaime, do you want me to repeat the question?
No, I've got it, Rachel. I think the greatest challenge that I've faced in this position is really about managing expectations. Do the tribe see you as their insider to act exclusively on the tribe's behalf? Or does the government agency you work for see you as their advocate to promote their agenda within Indian country? And it makes me think about a friend of mine who says when a tribal leader walks through the door, on their shoulders they carry over 13,000 years of culture, tradition, legal and political history, and the hopes for a future. And I took an oath of office when I ran for tribal council, and so I felt those on my shoulders. But then when I accepted this position, I took another oath. And when I took that oath, I inherited this additional layer of history and law and policies and court decisions that have not always gone in the favor of Indian country or a particular tribe. And so it can go both ways. Sometimes you disappoint a tribe, and other times you're able to help turn the tides to make a difference in Indian country. And I remember when Deb Haaland was nominated, and Sam Deloria wrote this wonderful blog where he cautioned Indian country to not add burdens to these political appointees like Deb, expecting that a Native person would always act for Native interests 100% of the times. Because we go to work for these entities that are not of our making. Certainly they have trust responsibilities, government to government relationships, and consultation, but there are these other layers, and it's a complicated governing system, the United States. So, the expectations that Native people in these leadership positions would always advocate and decide on the Indian side of every issue. I think it also feeds to the fear of non-Indians, of the risk that may be there when Indian people are putting these positions. But as Vine or Sam had written, he said, at least we bring to this game a voice and a face where it's never been before, that we can begin to bridge these differences and help in the transition to better understanding of tribal sovereignty and the relationship between the federal government and Indian country. So I'm not saying the job is easy, but there are those kind of challenges about the expectations. We find ourselves being tugged in multiple directions.
Yeah, absolutely. It's very dynamic within the government and tribal relations always. So, and a lot of history to uncover there. And I want to add a note about myself too. When I was crowned Miss Minnesota, I think within the first 3 days of when I started, I had multiple people say that I only won because I was an Indian and that they wanted that diversity card to be played for Miss Minnesota. And then another situation that arose is somebody actually tried to, they went to my board, I have a Miss Minnesota board, and they tried to get me dethroned, saying that I wasn't an American citizen because I was enrolled in the tribal nation. And I'm not really sure where that idea came from. It was just a really gross misunderstanding. But the fact that that even happened in the first place, to me, I was pretty shocked by. And then online, people are just, don't ever read the comments. I'm sure many of you know that, but many people came up to me and said, like, she doesn't look Indigenous. Is she a liar? She's maybe 92% Native, 98% white, little splash of coffee with a cup of creamer. Like, I heard all these different things that were just so negative that came right away. So when you take on Indigenous roles in leadership, you're bound to face these things. So I really commend all of you for standing within your own identity proudly, even when it's hard, and pushing forward anyway, because the paths that you're all carving along that way will, help the new generation behind you kind of usher in that path in the same way. And I think we're going to go on to some questions from the audience that we have. And we are also on pretty limited time, so if we could keep the responses just a little bit tighter, that would be appreciated. So let me pull up the group chat that I have here. So one of the first questions, and I think it's a great one, is what has brought you joy recently in the terms of representation? And we can start with Mathew.
Okay, I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
Yes, I can. So the question is, what has brought you joy recently within representation?
Recently, so I've been covering, the political cycle right now. So for the first time, I think all 7 of Minnesota's Anishinaabe tribes are included in Senate or Congressional District 8. So just to be able to cover that monumental development story, it's been great. That was my last radio story piece that I did. So I got to talk to Chairman Michael Fairbanks from White Earth, Luis Posada, who's like a political analyst. She's also Alan Roy. He's running for office here. She was very helpful. So that really being a part of that and being able to tell that story.
Wonderful. Thank you. Rosalie, what has brought you joy recently in terms of representation?
So I'm this pretty big fan of Koo Stevens. Do you know him?
I do. Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so I love Koo. I love everything he's doing. The fact that he has done honor runs, that his grandpa, when he was running away from boarding schools, he now runs that same route and makes it like an honor run. And he's now a freshman at the U of O, which, like, I'm not supposed to say this, but is one of the fastest schools. And overall, like, I'm just super proud of him. And I think that is getting to know him and talking to him a little bit more. It's just super exciting and brings me joy.
Awesome. That's wonderful. And Jaime, what has brought you joy in terms of representation?
Well, I think one of the things is why I'm here in Santa Fe, where we're doing what I figure is a very cutting edge agreement with two pueblos. We're using bipartisan infrastructure in the Rio Grande Valley. So that brings me joy. Also, just to see so many Native people in Washington, D.C., so you don't feel like you're alone in this business.
Yeah, there's a community developing out there, and it's wonderful to see. So I think a really great question is, how can you represent your Indigenous roots and get involved in your community if others don't view you as Indigenous based on your looks, or if you encounter lateral oppression? And I can certainly repeat that, but Mathew, if you'd like to start.
How can you represent if you don't look Indigenous, Native? Is that what was?
Yeah, I think the question is more so asking, like, you don't present as outwardly Native. How can you represent your Indigenous roots, get involved with your community, do all these things if you are not if people don't view you as Indigenous based on your looks, or if you counter that lateral oppression within your field.
Okay. I have a unique situation because of my last name, right? So just hearing that and then maybe seeing me or whatever, I don't worry about just being in the field that I am. I cannot worry about how other people perceive me. Like otherwise I'll get too, I won't be able to focus. I have a hard time focusing anyway. So any distraction, I'll just kind of like obsess over it. So I've had to teach myself just to focus in on what I need to do, what needs to be done. I have an assignment. This is what people want to know. This is the nut graph of the story. This is what I want to convey. This is what I want ultimately people to learn, right? So for me personally, I just try to stay focused. If I get sidetracked, I'll just tumble down. I'll tumble off the cliff and I'll never recover. So
yeah, absolutely. Rosalie, same question to you. How can you involved with your field or your community? If have you ever experienced an example like that of lateral oppression, and how did you rise above it, or how did you get involved in the first place?
Yeah, so I can answer this because I am white passing, and the natives on the Coast Salish side, not a ton of sun over there, so we're all a little bit more on like the paler side in general. But yeah, I have had tons of people tell me I don't look Native, especially when everyone was trying to invalidate what I was doing for missing and murdered Indigenous women. And there's a lot of pain there, right? For Natives who are darker, like they are treated worse than Natives who are light skinned or white passing. Like I don't get that initial the racism from my appearance alone. And I think if we're going to come from a way that, yes, we are all Indigenous and our skin color doesn't change that, but also being just aware, that we are, at least for Natives like me, like I do experience white passing privilege, and that's a thing. And by understanding where that lateral oppression comes from, it's coming from pain, it's coming from trauma, and to kind of break it down and understand that when they are saying these things, not a reflection of you, it's not really a reflection of them either, but it's a reflection of the division and the harm that has been done due to colorism. And that like these are real feelings. And if you continue to follow your roots, find ways to build community, and to really get like vulnerable and honest with people too, and say like, I do experience like white passing privilege and that's real. But I'm still Indigenous and this is my identity and my heritage. And also just proving to the community that you're here for the people. And regardless of being white passing, like you are Indigenous, your heart is Indigenous. And yeah, that's what I got.
Absolutely. Thank you. Jaime, same question to you.
I think Rosalie stuck the landing on that one. And I think that's a beautiful response, very heartfelt. And let's leave it there.
Yes, I agree. Thank you. It was a really great response. Thank you. All right, I think we have time for one more question. And that will, I think a great way to leave this is thinking about our next generations. We're all game changers, change makers within our own right, but how can we help the next generation kind of get into that same mindset? So what words or advice would you have to share with Indigenous students within the K-12 system, trying to get into radio, newsprint, sports, within the government? What advice do you have for the next generation? We'll start with Mathew.
So my great-grandfather was George Gillette. And he was chairman of the MHA Nation in 1948 when there's a great photograph. It's heartbreaking, but it's him and he's like holding back tears. And he's signing away. It's like a quarter of the reservation for this hydroelectric dam. People probably are familiar with that. That's my great grandfather. So seeing that. For me, just being able to build off of that legacy and trying to, maybe if I keep doing a good job, if I keep, bringing attention and an awareness, maybe, his legacy won't be that photo, of him crying, and not that it's a bad thing to be remembered for that, but his legacy, I'm an offshoot of that. I would say, do things in a good way, amplify voices, tell the stories that no one's telling, from my perspective, in my job, teach people, there's so many stories, there's so many interesting individuals that have important things to say that people can learn from, the culture, the people. Find your niche, do it, and don't worry about, like I said, too much about the perceptions. Stay focused, concentrate, and build on the legacies. We're still here because of how strong our ancestors were, right? There's a lot of bloodlines that don't exist at all. Last days people, they just don't exist, and it tells how strong we are.
Absolutely. Thank you. Rosalie.
Just to keep it real brief, I would say for youth, lean into your elders. They are ready, excited to talk to you. I can't remember, like every time I start talking to an elder, I just want to take a notebook, like grab a notebook and start writing everything they're saying down, because like that's just how valuable it is. Another thing I would say is give back to your community and they will give back to you. If you let your community know that you are getting out to the world with the intention of bringing everything back, they will support you when you're out there. And just leaning into that culture, that community, and being honest with yourself when you like, I need a break, or I need to go recharge with my people. And just learning how to walk that world between the Western world and the Indigenous world. It's got to be a balance.
Yeah, absolutely. And Jaime.
Yeah, I guess I would say, not be afraid to discover, explore. I didn't get to this position by taking a direct path. I would say there were leaps of faith, there was blind luck, there were times that I stumbled and fell. So I guess I would encourage people to have a little bit of courage to try to see the world through other lenses. I think that what's valuable for me is, I grew up on a reservation, and my aspiration was one day to come back home and work for the tribe. But I learned that, after I got my education, it might have been best to work somewhere else. Why not, as a young professional, go make my early mistakes working for somebody else? Build a network and relationships, and to bring that, build that personal capacity, and eventually have the time to bring that home, to be a better professional and contributor to society that had a perspective of the outside world. So I would just encourage people to have a sense of discovery in their journey.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a good wrap up of a piece of advice that was given to me by an elder that I work with. Her name is Sandy Whitehawk. And she shared this piece of advice with me at a work training, but she said that your ancestors prayed for you to live a life they couldn't long before your feet touched this earth. And they prayed for you in the womb, in their womb, and their grandmother's womb too. And I think that was a really profound piece of advice for me to hear, that I always share with kids, is that, our grandparents couldn't do what we're doing today. And we're hoping that we can also leave a world better for our grandchildren to do what we couldn't do today. So thank you all so much for sharing your stories today, for being honorable and honest with what you're doing, and for the work that you will continue to do. I know it's a hard path, but I really commend you all for doing that. And thank you so much for joining us today.
Wow, our panelists shared so many amazing stories and pieces of wisdom today. Húŋkpapญ่, Chimigwech, thank you to all of our panelists. And for those of you that attended today's virtual event, we're hoping you feel inspired to continue learning about these issues and share this information with members of your community. Keep having these conversations at home. If you learned something today and enjoyed this event, consider making a contribution to Native Governance Center. Visit our website, nativegov.org, to donate. And don't forget to support us on Give to the Max Day. It's the most important fundraising day of the year. It falls on November 17th. Additionally, we'd like to hear from you. We'll email a survey to our Zoom attendees and post a link in the Facebook comment section as well. Stay tuned for future virtual events. We're excited to launch our 2023 programming, and we'll make an announcement sometime after the first of the year. Many blessings to you all. Gigawabamin, Meniwa.